Welcome back to the county seat, our extended conversation for our online viewers. Joining us for a conversation is Fred Hayes from the Utah Division of State Parks, Jack Lytle, Commissioner from Daggett County up in the corner of the state, and Darren Bushman from Paiute County Country. Thanks for continuing the conversation. So as we were talking in the show, we were saying it's going to take everybody at the table, and it's going to take a lot of people putting things together. But there will be just as many people that look at these public lands and they say, how can you have multiple use when the multiple uses conflict? Because that's kind of been the argument that's pushed monuments. It's been kind of the argument that's pushed roadless initiative and everything, is that, well, yes, we're a multiple use agency, but we can't have multiple use because hikers and horsemen, ATVs and hunters, they don't mix. So how do you solve that problem?
Well, I think you have to start with the question of why don't they mix? You know, why can't horsemen and hikers mix? I've never read a law that says you can't. I don't know of a natural law that says they can't. So what causes it? What causes them not to be able to mix?
Well, probably perceptions.
Perceptions. Attitudes.
Perceptions,
Okay.
Lack of education.
Yeah. The same thing that causes fly fishermen to hate worm drowners, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's an expected recreational outcome that somebody else is going to get in the way of. If I'm a hiker and I want to go out on a trail and I want absolute quiet and I don't want to see anybody else, it doesn't matter who comes along, whether it's a horse or a mountain bike or an ATV, it just doesn't matter. So I think one of the things we have to do is we have to, as much as we can, get people that dose of whatever they're looking for. And if that means there are some trails that are strictly hiking trails, or some trails that are strictly ATV trails, or some trails that are strictly, pick your subject, yeah, horseback or whatever, that probably has to happen. But for a lot of us, that crossover doesn't really matter. I remember floating the lower Provo below Deer Creek one time. And as we came around the bend in the river, there was a guy fly fishing, and he pulls his line in. And I said, I'm sorry, we're in your way. And he says, we all use the same river. As soon as we were gone, he went right back to fishing. Didn't bother him a lick that we were there. So I think that's part of it.
I think tolerance is key. And I think as a general rule of thumb, we've become intolerant as a society. You know, we see it even in the off-road vehicle function. You see dirt bikers. Yeah. Dirt bikers versus ATVers versus UTVers. They all have their own little niche, and they think none of the rest of them should be there. And so, you know, I think there's a certain level of tolerance that we need to have. And, you know, I find it interesting. We see protests about public lands. We see people with signs that say these are my public lands. And I think that's wrong. It's our public lands, right? And so we need to think of it as our versus my. You know, it's a selfish centrism scenario versus, you know, realizing that we all use the same river, you know, so.
So is it restrictive land policies that are fueled by myopic thinking that actually stop the concept of tourism from moving forward because there are too many existing restrictions on parcels of land?
I don't know which came first, you know, the chicken or the egg in that scenario. I don't know whether it's the land policies that influenced the myopic thinking, or is it the myopic thinking that has driven the land policies to the point where they are now?
Fred, I've pondered that question for 15 years.
Yeah, I read a story the other day. A guy said he'd ordered both a chicken and an egg from Amazon, and he was going to solve the question at the end of the day. But the reality is that both play on each other. You know, and land policies are based on sometimes on which loser is less likely to sue the government entity. Mm-hmm. And so the land policy then defaults to the shallow pocket or whoever's less likely to pursue it. And nobody wins under that scenario. What we need to do, and I think Darren hit it smack dab on the head, is we need to, as a society, be more tolerant of other people. When we drove in today, every one of us had big trucks on the road, small trucks on the road. There were motorcycles there. There were red Toyotas and blue Civics. We didn't seem to care because we've come to accept that that is a shared use area. But boy, I'll tell you what, we don't want to do that in our recreation space, and we've got to get beyond that.
So is there a way to kind of corridor things in shared access and where you kind of like branch out from a hub? Is that part of a model that would work?
I think there is. Well, we had that discussion the other day. Again, we were talking trails in the Daggett and Uintah County area, and we talked about shared trailheads. We can do that. And then everybody kind of goes their own way. Those trails may cross each other. They may share space for a little while while everybody disperses into their own, kind of favored experience. I think we can do that.
And I think users can have an impact too. I really think users can have an impact. If our OHV community is courteous to horses, to hikers, to joggers, if they learn that, and vice versa, if our those other communities are courteous to each other, believe it or not, I actually used to run, and so when I would run, it would drive me crazy when somebody would go by me in a UTV at 60 miles an hour and I'm choking dust for 20 minutes. Simple courtesy can go a long ways, I think, to helping resolve this intolerance. So
we had a snowmobile trailhead where a guy pulled up who was a skier and intentionally parked directly in front of a truck with a long snowmobile trailer behind him so that the snowmobile trailer couldn't leave. Intentionally parked there, blocked him in, and then went skiing. Well, so to aggravate the situation, snowmobilers came back and lifted up his Subaru and put it on top of the plow berm, which meant that he could no longer go home. And we do that, I'm afraid, way too often. Instead of, the guy could have come in, taken the parking spot to the side, all would have been well, and we just kept feeding the fight. And I don't think we need to do that.
No, and I think with that, I think in our communities we can be examples of how it can work. And I know that's what we strive for in terms of the mixes that even within a community. Whether it's even on we have an active tourism board, and they are the STP type that, help me with the acronym again.
same three people.
Same three
In
people.
your case, two,
kind of,
right?
Well, no, but they have to feel valued, or they do feel valued in their position, and we have to remember that the different aspects that they bring to the table are hugely important, and make sure that we're paying attention to what they're telling us. As commissioners, I'm sure with state parks, the same thing. They're a representative sometimes of those different entities, and how we treat each other a lot of times is an extension of how others treat us. And I think that's a big part of how we can start making that work, whether we're listening better or actually speaking up at times to say, hey, wait, that doesn't fit, without some more discussion. Not that we'd get into the situation of, if you're not with me, you're against me. That attitude is a difficult thing to work through.
I would love to have this group get together a year from now and see if we've made any progress on this.
I think we have to.
I do.
All right, you're on. Thanks for watching this extended version of the county seat. Remember, local government is where your life happens, so be involved and be part of the solution. We'll see you next week on the county seat.